All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Global Taiwan Institute. My name is Russell Hsiao. I am the Executive Director here at GTI. GTI is a 501c3 think tank dedicated exclusively to Taiwan policy research and related programs. Our mission is to enhance the relationship between the United States and Taiwan with the world by contributing to a more informed discussion about Taiwan and its people. In pursuit of that mission, we undertake several major programs. They include our bi-weekly Global Taiwan Brief, where we feature timely analysis and informed opinions about current developments related to Taiwan. Public seminars, an annual symposium, which is actually scheduled for next month, so stay tuned for the official announcement about that program shortly. Podcasts, we actually have 3 podcasts now. Our latest and newest podcast is Taiwan Salon, which features discussion about cultural diplomacy and Taiwan's soft power, as well as scholarship and fellowship opportunities. So if you're not already subscribed to receive our updates as well as opportunities directly in your inbox, you may do so by visiting our website at globaltaiwan.org. Now, I'll be remiss if I began today's program without thanking our co-founders, directors, advisors, staff, and interns who make all our programs possible. So let's begin today's program. Now, we are truly delighted to be able to co-host today's public seminar on lessons learned from the aftermath of the PLA's August 2022 military exercises with the Prospect Foundation from Taiwan. Now, there are few institutions whose analysts are as well informed and respected in Taiwan to comment on the country's strategic and security thinking. So we are very fortunate here at GTI to be able to host their delegation here today to help inform our thinking about some of the very pressing issues related to recent developments in the Taiwan Strait, as well as for the exchange that we are about to have, as well as following this discussion about these matters. So, following U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in early August, the PRC orchestrated a wide-ranging and unprecedented series of military exercises around Taiwan, the likes of which have not been seen since the third Taiwan Strait crisis of 1995 to 1996. Now, a lot has been said, much ink has been spilled over Beijing's actions thus far, which included military exercises encircling the island, economic boycotts and sanctions. But I would emphasize the point here that this so-called crisis is still ongoing. Some assessments, including those of senior members of the Biden administration, believe that these actions have been long planned and that Beijing simply used Speaker Pelosi's visit as a pretext, while others argue that Speaker's visit was what provoked Beijing's response. Regardless, while most of the world's attention has been focused on Beijing's destabilizing behaviors, most assessments have not looked at how the United States and Taiwan should respond or attempt to draw lessons learned from the current incident, actions, as well as what may come ahead in the days and months for the future of the Taiwan Strait. So today, our panel will review those military exercises as well as tests, and we'll try to dive in and attempt to draw out some preliminary lessons learned from this current phase of this situation. In part, we will try to take a longer view of the escalation and de-escalation patterns in the Taiwan Strait and discuss the events leading up to, during, and following the prior 1995-1996 crisis, and apply that to the current circumstances as well as the dynamics at play currently and try to make sense of all of that. I think it's also helpful at this point right now to also to underscore perhaps the Biden administration's thinking on such current events, and it bears repeating, I think, in verbatim here, and I refer to the press call that on August 12th, in which Kurt Campbell, who is the Deputy Assistant to the President as Coordinator for Indo-Pacific, stated, and I quote, China's actions are fundamentally at odds with the goal of peace and stability. They are part of an intensified pressure campaign against Taiwan, which has not ended, and we expect it to continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months. The goal of this campaign is clear: to intimidate and coerce Taiwan and undermine its resilience, end quote. And I think that that quote in particular deserves special emphasis, and I think underscores, the importance of the discussion that we are about to have today. Some other issues that we hope to address include whether there's discernible patterns in how Beijing escalates and de-escalates military and political tensions in the Taiwan Strait, and really what are the policy implications for Washington and Taipei. Additionally, what are the political and military signals embedded in Beijing's actions? Critically, what are the important lessons learned about Chinese political intent with regards to their military capabilities and intention to use it against Taiwan? And most importantly here for our discussion, how should the United States and Taiwan respond to the current ongoing situation? So to help us make sense of these exercises, the capabilities and their underlying intent, assess the implications for the future, we are really truly fortunate to have this A-team expert panel here. Now let me first introduce our friends from Taiwan. To my immediate left, with I-Chung, who is the president of the Prospect Foundation. Prior to joining the Prospect Foundation, he held several prominent positions within the ruling DPP, also serving as executive director of the DPP mission here in the United States. He has also worked as a special assistant to the representative office in Tokyo. To his left, we have to my far left, we have Dr. Arthur Ding, who is a distinct, Andrew's not Arthur, but you both start with A in your name, who is a distinguished professor emeritus with National Cheng-chih University in Taiwan, was also served as director and distinguished research fellow at the Institute of International Relations at NCCU. Now, to Dr. Lai's left, to I-Chung's left, we have Dr. Andrew Scobell, who is a distinguished fellow with the China program at the U.S. Institute of Peace, where he focuses on U.S.-China relations and China's armed forces and defense policy, and China's foreign relations with countries and regions around the world. Last but not least, to my immediate right, we have Ivan Kanapathy, who is a senior associate, non-resident at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where he also holds the Freeman Chair in China Studies. From 2018 to July 2021, Ivan served in the White House's National Security Council staff as Director for China, Taiwan, Mongolia, and Deputy Senior Director for Asian Affairs. So the format for today's discussion will be entirely a moderated discussion. So where I'll present a series of questions, and I encourage all the speakers here to comment on each other's remarks in order to facilitate a dialogue. Now, we will leave around 15 minutes at the end of the session to take audience Q&A. So for our online audience, you may begin submitting your questions at any time via the chat function on our YouTube page or via Twitter as well. So I think to start today's discussion, let me begin with a listing of some known knowns based on public reporting regarding the exercises. First, the PLA designated 7 closure areas surrounding Taiwan. 6 were announced on August 2nd, another one the day after. 3 of the closure areas encroached into Taiwan's territorial waters. 2 of the closure areas encroached into Japan's declared EEZ, exclusive economic zones, and 1 into the Philippines EEZ. On August 4th, the PLA fired up to 11 missiles into 5 of these closure areas in a sequence that bracketed Taiwan. And 4 of the missiles reportedly overflew northern Taiwan. These were outside the atmosphere, and so they did not technically intrude into Taiwan's airspace. And 5 of these missiles landed in Japan's declared EEZ. There were unprecedented incursions by PLA fighters across the Taiwan Strait Sentry Line or Medium Line. There's also been a coordinated propaganda campaign leading up to Speaker Pelosi's visit, during and following. Cyber attacks, which were relatively low grade, I would say, which largely involved DDoS attacks on government websites, as well as what's been reported on a great deal recently about these drone flights over the offshore islands of Taiwan. There have been also PLA naval exercises that simulated what they call a blockade of Taiwan, although there's been very little specifics as to the types of the vessels that were deployed. And maybe perhaps in our discussion, we might be able to have further assessments about that. I would also shamelessly plug here the recent articles written by my GTI's Deputy Director, John Dodson, both in the most recent issue of the Global Taiwan Brief, as well as the prior one, really covering these military exercises. So if you want a detailed assessment about these exercises, including some from contributing articles regarding the centerline flight, please do visit our website and read these briefs. But just as interesting as what we know they did, it's also what they did not do. And one is that there were no apparent major amphibious exercises. And then despite the designated closure areas that encroached on Taiwan's territorial waters, there were, at least to my knowledge, no known physical intrusions into Taiwan's territorial waters and airspace by these in these exercises and tests that were conducted by the PLA. So, with that long introduction and framing of today's discussion, let me kick off here, and I want to start here with Andrew Scobell here, because one of the, I think, important elements of these exercises is that beyond what we do know that they have done, it's also just trying to parse out what the notable features are of these exercises. And so I want to ask you what you felt were the most notable features of these exercises, and more specifically, though, I want to get your sense in terms of what are the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns, right? As famously coined by the late Donald Rumsfeld, right? So, Andrew, over to you.
Challenge. Thanks, Russell. I'm not a huge fan of Donald Rumsfeld, but God rest his soul. But I prefer to phrase, what do we know, what don't we know? Are China's capabilities, the PLA's capabilities, and how they're likely to be used based on reading doctrinal writings that are so far reasonably well available to us. So we can judge what we've seen in the Taiwan Strait compare it with that. And the honest thing, I don't think we really learn terribly much what we've seen last month. It was a show of force. It was a demonstration, a massive controlled temperature. Does it? What is it? Does it illuminate how China might act in future against Taiwan? Not necessarily beyond the demonstrated signal that they're able to planning some kind of blockade, right? So, but what don't we know? We don't know Beijing's calculus, deliberations process, and their time horizons and how that's evolving in response, I think, to the triggering event here, which was the U.S. Speaker's visit to the island. So I would say maybe Rumsfeldian logic, it has its own dynamic, and we shouldn't ignore it. But I think the Chinese are more likely to be adopting a Sunzian approach to this. So it's what Sun Tzu famously said. There's the orthodox and the unorthodox, or the conventional and the unconventional, and that's pretty straightforward. But what is noteworthy is that the combination of the orthodox and the unorthodox can be, is in the infinite variations on that. So what does that boil down to is like China will surprise us. How they will surprise us, we don't really know, but we know they will surprise us. But it's this combination. How will they surprise us? It's in the combination of Zheng and Xi.
Well, I think one of the specific to the exercises too that really stood out were the ballistic missile exercises that bracketed Taiwan and several overflew Taiwan. The other are the really the massive intrusions of these PLA fighter aircrafts in near daily across the center line of the Taiwan Strait. I think Beijing sent nearly around 300 military aircrafts across the center line this month. Even I think some estimates exceed that. Recently, I think I saw one estimate from the Taiwan government that there were over 400 in the month of August alone. And I want to turn to you, Ivan. With these massive crossings of the center line, what was the PLA signaling with that?
Hey, thanks, Russell. Great to be here. Really appreciate it. And to address that question, I think we have to look, hard at what the center line is and sort of the origins of it. And I think if you look over the past few years preceding Speaker Pelosi's visit, that there's a clear trend line already established of sort of increasing. And I think, like you said, or like the administration said, Speaker Pelosi's visit may have been a pretext, but most likely for what we should expect. And frankly, I think, Andrew and others that have watched PLA development for the last 20 plus years, right? You sort of, I think it's very much anticipated that as they increase their power projection capabilities, naval and air, that they are going to increase the number, the cadence, the frequency of their overwater exercises, patrols, et cetera. That's 100% to be expected. And now we overlay that over something that's historical, whether it's the ADIZ that Taiwan declares or, the center line. That sort of, these are just norms. And so as the military balance shifts, it's just a question of, we would 100%, at least I would expect these norms to change. And so I think we've reached a point where, the PLA is sort of like, I can do it, so I wouldn't, 20, 30 years ago, it was a struggle for them to sort of challenge our center line over and over. Now it's not. And so I think, if you go back one slide for you, Russell, that depiction is territorial, right? And then outside of that, you've got contiguous. If you go back forward, it's a different sort of depiction. Right? And I think for Taiwan, we just need to think about from a defensive perspective, what's the key way of looking at things. I think it's sort of protecting the island. Yeah. And so sort of the territorial contiguous, and how far are you from me? Not necessarily how far are you crossing some line that was drawn, 50 years ago. Because frankly, it actually gives, in my view, it gives China a talking point more than South China. Because it in some ways highlights Taiwan's inability to enforce something. So I'll just kind of stop there.
If I could just stick with you, Ivan, just a bit, because, I think you made some really interesting observations there, but there are concerns that there is a risk right now of these center line crossings normalizing, right? And so what are the risks in your view? I mean, I think you've already implied your view on this issue, but if I can draw you out a little bit more, let's talk more explicitly about that. And so what's, what are the risks of the normalization?
So to me, 2 days ago, I think there were 3 center line crossings. M&D publishes these every day. Everyone sees these. And they were on the northern portion of the center line. Typically on the extremes of the center line, you see the aircraft profiles. They're typically basically pointed at the Philippine Sea or something. A lot of times there's US Navy operating out there, and that might actually be part of the intended signaling target of why these exercises happen. It may have absolutely nothing to do with Taiwan, frankly. And I think we need to sort of understand, whereas, when Speaker Pelosi or other congressional delegations since then, you saw centerline crossings that happened right opposite Taoyuan. That to me is a much higher risk than the extremes. And so just sort of adding these all up and saying, I have 300 of these confuses, I think, the risks a little bit. So again, I think if you look back, again, in your previous slide, if we concern ourselves more with, hey, what's actually pointed at, what are the profiles that are potentially infringing on my being Taiwan's territorial space? That's how the risk analysis should go. Maybe the line itself isn't the best gauge.
I'm not picking on you, Ivan, but this is you're making some really interesting points here. But isn't there a danger though to the fact that that Taiwan could become desensitized to these these center line crossings and these type of flight activities? I mean, what's in your view then are the implications of that?
Yeah, I actually agree with that, Russ. I think the danger of desensitizing is happening because Southwest tornadoes or extremes, like it's literally every day. And so there is a desensitization. So when it happens, on occasion, still so far, directly across from Taoyuan or Taichung, like I think to the rest of the world, they're like, oh, another center line crossing. But that one's much more significant in my view. And so I think the desensitization has happened by sort of spreading that out and sort of muddling this a little bit in the public narrative.
Well, thank you. I-Chung, I want to turn to you now because obviously Taiwan hasn't been a passive player in all of this, and I think many actually observers have applauded. I think Taipei's very measured and I think response and calm response to these provocations. And so maybe for our audience and also for just to give us an overview of what Taiwan's response to these exercises and tests have been would I think be helpful to help better frame our discussion today. So can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, Russell. And first of all, before I begin, I would just say that happy Moon Festival to all of you, because that's in Taiwan, that's huge. And it's unfortunate that I did not bring enough mooncake for everyone. And I think the situation, I'll say, in Taipei's view, although Russell, you like to portray that this is a calm and a restraint and everything seems to be in control, but I would say that the situation is like quite scenario. That is loose from the outside, but internally we are highly, highly sensitive and very, very nervous. After these exercises, and of course it is continued, the Taiwan military and its national security establishment is very much concerned about the establishment of the Chinese Union, which not only the central line of Taiwan Strait has been erased, but also the China vessels are able to operate very, very conveniently and easily in the water, just in the containment zone, and some of the even within the containment zone there. And the issue about the Taiwan Strait central line that to the Taiwan defense perimeters, how we have been seeing this out, that has also been in very high alert on our. And so you started to see that that's why Taiwan facing the vessels and also the jets, especially the one that crosses central line. We always send our jet scramble to intercept it, to make the point that you have to go back. And also our vessels as well, despite the tonnage inferiority that we have a much smaller ship versus Chinese much bigger ship. And should the collision happens, the damage to ours definitely will be much more than the Chinese. But despite that, our naval officers still operate. And even in one of the story, according to some of the social media, by some of the sailors in one ship, this guy talks about that should the things happen, they are prepared to ram into the Chinese ship. So it is that deadly serious. So I would say that the desensitization of the security awareness in Taiwan, definitely to the outside, that is something that the people we cannot afford to be desensitized. But also there's a real need for Taiwan. We need to prevent China from really having this new normal. And another important issue is that Dr. Andrew Scobell talks about this exercise as a demonstration of capabilities and sending a political signal. But then our analysis about these actions and also indicates that those exercises actually has been exercised by China or practiced for a longer time. And otherwise, for China to bring this much earlier than what they anticipate to have in response to the Nancy Pelosi Speaker Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan. Usually, you just pull out something you already have been very good at and deeply experienced at. And so those are the action and the activities that we found out that China practiced at least for a significant amount of time. And that brings up to the war preparations on Taiwan. In the past, we used to talk about the gray zone operations versus the invasions by China, as those are two distinct scenarios. And sometimes we try to have the dichotomy between those two. And then the resources and the scenario response, and its related resource allocations seems to fall in the debate about which one is more important, which one is more urgent. But then after this exercise, it seems to indicate to us that there is no more the kind of the big dichotomy between those two. You'll be the continuum from the quarantine to the and escalate to the blockade and all the way to the oil attack. And that makes all the more urgent for Taiwan that we need to respond in the early phases rather than we wait until their attack on Taiwan. And that also will bring up to the current urgency regarding how are we able to deal with the erasure of the Mainland Taiwan Strait as well as the Chinese vessels operations near in a much closer water in Taiwan. And adding to those, we also discovered that the drone operation by China is not limited to the offshore islands. Just yesterday, our Minister of National Defense announced the long-range drones by China across the Mainland Taiwan Strait, but also they are already spotted several, or at least one of them, of the long-range drones that have been discovered in the northeast of the Taiwan. And that also demonstrates a very different capability as well as the warring scenarios. Because it is one thing that you can operate the quarter palace in the island very much closer to China, and you can make fun of Taiwanese militaries. But it is quite another for the China to be able to operate a much more sophisticated military drones crossing all the way to Taiwan Straits and even to the northeast of Taiwan. And if you look at the geography as well as the horizons, it basically that's beyond the horizons. And does that mean that the China is able to integrate its satellite capabilities with the drones? Or does that mean the Chinese has a constant presence in the northeast or east of Taiwan in the ship so that the drone actually flew from the ship? So those are the new things that we need to really look at very seriously. And finally, I would say that this exercise also, there's some bright spot. One of them is that it made Japan realize that the Taiwan contingency is Japan contingency. So that's why Japan really come out and strong and protesting. And especially if you look at Japan's concern, it's not just about the missiles falling into the Japan's EEZ. Because if you look at the, to put up yeah, if you look at the plot there, the Japan's Kinakuni Island, there, okay. Just right have been sandwiched by two the Chinese missiles, drones, missile zone there. Similar situation also happened to Philippines. Actually, Philippines north is the northern island, Yami Island. Sit here between here and that. Those are also the Chinese missiles falling areas. It is important to let everyone knows that the situation happening in Taiwan is not just, it's not going to just limited to the Taiwan Straits. It's going to be regional. Japan will be involved, Philippines will be involved. And there are the significant concerns after this by Philippine side about how this might include them. So I would say that right now we're dealing with this and the insensitizing about the mainland Taiwan Straits has a wider security implication, not just for Taiwan, but also for the regions.
Thank you for that, Ethan. That was excellent. And I think you really covered the military aspects of these operations really meticulously. Arthur, I want to turn to you, and you know, I think this building on some of the points that I-Chung had earlier made. You know, some have assessed that these exercises and that these are basically dress rehearsals. You know, for invasion of Taiwan. First of all, do you agree with this assessment? And in your view, what were the military exercises and intended audience, as well as the political and military political signals, especially these exercises and tests?
Okay, thank you, Russell, for invitation. Really come back again, because I remember in the 2016, 6 years ago, when you were open house,
Yeah.
I was here. So,
Welcome back.
Yeah, really glad to come back. Is this kind of a rehearsal for invasion or not? Probably not, but I would say, you know, we all know that the so-called unification, the so-called the Hardy mission, you know, for the CCP, and in the past, since 1995 Taiwan Strait crisis, China spent tremendous resources for military modernization. And along with that, they developed the so-called new doctrine as mentioned by Andrew earlier. So I guess, you know, taking Taiwan back by force is in their so-called annual operational training or operational exercise. They have different scenario, different contingencies, so on and so forth. So I guess, you know, this exercise this time, you know, we talk about 7 zones designated, and at least my reading is that they are practicing, if not a rehearsal, but practicing and to test how their so-called war planning, operational planning level, how feasible it is, so on and so forth. For instance, those missiles hitting to the east of Taiwan and Taiwan in the Pacific region, apparently it's kind of an A2AD, anti-access and area denial, and definitely is, you know, try to deny U.S. involved in whatever way, aircraft carrier or others. And those in the northeast probably try to interdict the Japanese force if possible. And those in the Taiwan southwest probably, because, you know, we all know the AUKUS, you know, between United States and Australia. So I would say it's quite a comprehensive test for the operational plan to see how feasible and to try to find out what is the deficiency, what is the strength, so on and so forth. So I don't know if it's rehearsal or not, but at least it's kind of a real test to see how feasible and to find out the deficiency and the strength, so on and so forth. So definitely they gotta have an internal review of the whole exercise. So these are the 4 points I would like to make. So definitely they send a signal to probably all over the world, to the United States, to Japan, and also probably send signal to Australia, say, look, we are prepared. And so you got to be careful if you want to get involved in this Taiwan Strait crisis or whatever kind of conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So that my own thing is they send a very strong political signal through this kind of military exercise. Yeah, no doubt. They also take their, they have so many new platforms, new doctrines. So they also need to take and develop so many, so many satellites in the space, and how to integration with the space and the air, so on and so forth. So how to test the so-called jointness, because they talk about integrated joint operation, so-called 一体化联合作战. I guess Andrew know quite well. We read all the similar books, So I think this is quite a case because you need to. They have worship in different places of the Taiwan, so they need to coordinate, to test the satellites, connectivity, so on and so forth. It's quite a complex operation, I would say. So, so those are I guess my own reading of the whole military exercise. So probably let me start.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that, Arthur. I think that's really helpful for to have that assessment. I think as all this conversation that we've had thus far is really centered upon this display of military force. But I think we need to get a little bit more granular and get a bit more deeper assessments about why, when, and how trying to use this force. And I think Andrew here, you would be the perfect person to address this question because you've done a lot of your analysis and writing about this very topic about why, when, and how trying to use this force, and in particular, if you could apply that assessment to with regards to Taiwan, that would be very helpful. So, the question to you is really, what do these exercises tell us, or these tests tell us about why, when, and how China may use force against Taiwan?
So even though it's kind of paradoxical, Thanks. Okay. Thank you. That Chinese PLA doctrine emphasizes seizing the initiative. But what you've seen repeatedly in the Taiwan Strait over the years is China in reactive mode, and most recently a reaction to the Speaker Pelosi's visit. But I think that tenet of being proactive is still a very important theme running through training and education of China's military leaders. I think when, where, and how it kind of depends on the strategic calculus in Beijing. And I think a chapter that I contributed to an edited volume that just came out in the U Press titled "Crossing the Strait." No prizes for guessing which strait we're talking about. But in that chapter, I use prospect theory, which is an economic theory, to try and shed some light on Chinese thinking about Taiwan and when they might decide to use force. When you're in the domain of gains, in other words, when things are looking up, you tend to be risk averse. When you switch to the domain of losses, then you tend to be more risk acceptant. And so the example of the gambler, if the gambler is at a casino, and I guess the Chinese like to gamble, so maybe this isn't such a wacky analogy. When you're winning, you're amassing your pile of money, and you don't want to. Your tendency is to be more conservative as you got either quit. I want a lot of money. It's time to go home, cash in and go home, or you keep gambling, but you're more wary about how much you gamble. On the flip side, if you're losing and losing big, then you think that the psychology is, I know I'm going to get lucky. And you're more risk, so you're more likely. So how does that translate to the Taiwan Strait? It's if Xi Jinping and his Politburo colleagues are reasonably confident that that the status quo is okay, and trends are moving in the right direction towards eventual unification, then they're going to they feel like they've got Taiwan, so to speak, and so they're going to be very cautious about rocking the boat. I'm mixing metaphors, but then if they're worried, if they start to think that they're losing Taiwan and trends are moving in the wrong direction, then they're going to be more likely to take a risk. And no matter how improved the capabilities of the PLA are, and you've seen that compare the 95, 96 strait crisis to the most recent one. You just see the scope and scale and complexity of the operations and the platforms being used. Even though they have much greater capabilities to use there's still a question mark about how effective can they be, and so there's a risk. There's risk associated with any military operation. Anybody who's I haven't served in uniform, but I've certainly worked for the military as a civilian, and any operation, there's an element of risk. And I think China's leaders are aware of that. However, proud and reasonably confident they are of China's improving capabilities and ability to execute. So that's the key question. Is Beijing in the domain of gains, to see itself in the domain of gains, or in the domain of losses? And I think the honest answer, or at least my honest answer, is I don't know. But it might be, it's very possible that the speaker's visit to Taiwan was the tipping point or inflection point that Xi Jinping and company have reached, have determined three things. But we don't know because we're not privy to those those deliberations. But they may have reached the inflection point vis-a-vis Taiwan, where they conclude that peaceful unification is a failed policy, right? And that trends are moving in the wrong direction away from unification. And then the follow-on conclusion is that we have no alternative but to use force. Now, that sounds very dramatic, and I think I tended to. But going back to what Dr. Lai was saying, thinking about the use of force by China against Taiwan, it's a continuum. Right? It really is a continuum. And when Beijing uses the term peaceful unification, I don't think they mean it in the same way that Americans, people in Washington do, and people in Taipei do. And an example of this is, or an insight into this is, the discussion amongst some analysts, military analysts in public, about what would constitute peaceful unification with Taiwan. And some talk about the Peking model or the Beiping model, which was, of course, which they say was peaceful resolution, right? But going back to the Chinese Civil War, what are they really talking about? They're talking about, from their perspective, the surrender of the city to communist forces. But it wasn't what most people would say as a peaceful unification. It was coercion, right? We look what we did to Tianjin, right? We will do that to you unless you lay down your arms. So it's really peaceful unification. Beijing's mindset is it's about coercion.
Can I ask you to widen the scope a bit and not only look at these exercises, but look in maybe, since Xi Jinping, ascended into power in 2012 onwards, what does, the sort of the actions that they've taken against Taiwan tell you, and including the military exercise, tell you about Xi Jinping's sort of risk perceptions? Applying that to the model that you use, but taking a little wider scope and including a bit more of what has happened since Xi Jinping has come into power, and this really comprehensive pressure campaign that they've been enacted since 2016, and what that means for their Xi Jinping's risk perceptions there.
I think you can't divorce it from the upcoming next month's 20th Party Congress. People talk about, or were concerned that Speaker Pelosi's visit was really dangerous because who knows how Beijing would respond. But in some ways, there's never an ideal time given the situation for someone like Nancy Pelosi to visit Taipei, but I would argue it was actually, all things considered, it was a better time than going after the 20th Party Congress. How does that relate to your question? Because I think after the Party Congress, I think Xi Jinping is going to feel more emboldened and more risk accepted. That said, it's a complicated set of factors. But what is we know, or we've heard explanation about what Beijing was trying to signal through its military actions around Taiwan, and they're certainly going to claim there was a success, but these things are going to continue, right? There are going to be more CODELs going to Taiwan. Taiwan's not going to roll over and play dead, right? And that fun. So then there are going to be subsequent, tensions and crises. And then what is Beijing going to do for an encore? And the ratcheting up of coercive measures and provocations against Taiwan, that in a sense paints Xi Jinping into a corner, because then he feels more pressure. He will likely feel more pressure to show some results. And so he may become more risk acceptant, and that doesn't mean necessarily launching an invasion of Taiwan, but doing things that will that could cause unintended accidents, collisions, deaths, and those are highly escalatory and dangerous, and we could see us stumble or push to the brink of an unwanted conflict.
So I know you have a two-finger that you wanted to here.
I think this conversation now boils down to how we're going to see Xi Jinping himself and the kind of the person that in the decisions that he wanted to make. First, I will say that about the Chinese military harassment against Taiwan, that started before the U.S. ever sailed a ship into the Taiwan Straits. It started at September 2016, and then continued and intensified in 2017. And then in year 2018, China even sent the jets crossed the Taiwan Straits, both of them, and in March the 31st. I remember that day very well. And then in the year 2020, some events, China used that send jets and also crossing in multiple times. And now we have this. China always want to portray that they're in a reactive mode. But if you look at the starting and the whole thing, China started this whole things in year 2016. Then the United States started to come in, react to Chinese action. But the China right now, they are portraying this as they're reacting to the U.S. reactions. So I would say that going back to the origin, that I do not think China's in a reactive mode. China wanted to create something, and this goes back to how we're going to see Xi Jinping. I would say that the year 2012, when the Xi Jinping assumed the General Secretary of the Communist Party, at that time, 99% of analysts in Taiwan will say that, oh, basically Xi Jinping, he is a no character person, so even Hu Jintao's rule and Xi will follow. So Hu Gui Xi is. I remember at that time, everyone. And look at what happened right now. And in Taiwan's view, I would say that the year 2013, even the Xi Jinping's action initiative surprised KMT. If you remember in June, I think in June, middle of June, the Wu Boxiong took a delegations to China from KMT to China. And Xi Jinping there laid out the 4 very elaborate points about how the KMT CCP should work. And right over there, so 92 consensus, the word doesn't even utter it even once. And he also laid out how the unification of KMT should work to fulfill the obligations as Chinese nations. And Xi Jinping also reversed the whole economic, the so-called goodies strategy toward Taiwan. Hu Jintao wanted to prove to the people of Taiwan how the China is so good and that they are even trying to give the benefit to Taiwanese people so that they win the hearts and minds of the Taiwanese people back to China. But Xi Jinping is taking the whole Chinese market as this is a price. If you wanted to go back to the motherland or the fatherland, whatever you want to say it, all those things will be there for you, for your development. So the direction, Hu Jintao want to put something in Taiwan to convince Taiwanese people. Xi Jinping is all talking about that. Come back to the mama, and then I will preserve all the opportunity for you. So basically the direction is also very different. And when we goes to the year 2015-16, you could also sense that Xi Jinping, in his view, and in year 2014, it is a Chinese party also come out to attack the Maoizhou at one point. When the Maoizhou October, it has the comment regarding the umbrella movement in year 2014. And then the Chinese newspaper come out and say that the CCP does not owe anything to the Maoizhou, so you just behave, right in their editorials. Not to mention that a little bit earlier, that year 2013, Xi Jinping personally told the Vincent Xu in Indonesia that the political differences cannot last for generations. And so those are the very public records about Xi Jinping. He himself has taken initiative about Taiwan, and in a much more drastic manner, rather than the things that we have with Hu Jintao. So at least in my view, that according to those many the episodes that happened in the past, we cannot expect what we have from Hu Jintao, and then we continue to expect this will in the Xi Jinping. And when we look at the both of them, the grow up and the political maturization process, Xi Jinping basically is a generation that matured in the Cultural Revolutions. So I think this Cultural Revolutions political leadership, whether that's Xi Jinping that in the younger age or the Bo Xilai in the older age, that will have a certain character that we need to remind ourselves that what are they going to see? Do they basically see the war as a zero-sum game? There's no win-win-win-win, which means that I'm going to win twice rather than you win and I win. Those kind of things. And fast forward to the issue in Taiwan, China, in year 2017 and 18. After the 19th National Congress and Xi Jinping his start of the second term, in year 2018, suddenly we started to see that a new initiative on Taiwan happened when China demanded the multinationals. You have to relabel the Taiwans as Taiwan China, or whatever, or you probably your social credit and your business China will be affected. These are the new initiative, and I remember at that time the Trump administration, the National Security Council, come and say that this is really nonsense, right? But although this is some of the past episode, but it also puts an important extra mark regarding how the Chinese Xi Jinping is looking at things. And after all those disinformation campaign by China in years 2018 and 19, remember that the year 2019, January 2nd, Xi Jinping, in his personal speech toward Taiwan, he changed the whole definition of dynamic consensus, and that's it. And he probably talked about the one country, two system Taiwan solutions. Even call for the Taiwan compatriot to go to China to talk with them about how to deal with the solutions. And knowing that this is not going to go well with the people in Taiwan. And I will say that that initiative is part of the reason that the Xi Jinping made or helped Tsai Ing-wen to win the election in the year 2020. So rational analysis many times will point to the opposite direction, that he should not do that, but he choose. Why? And so those are the things that I think that there is a certain assumption that we need to re-examine regarding how the China is especially Xi Jinping and looking at the things. And I would say finally that when the Xi Jinping successfully assumed his third terms, will Xi Jinping, because of that, he is secure and then he will be he is afford to take the risk, and so that some of the actions, whether that's the Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, he would not take such a drastic measure or not. Of course, we never know. But according to the past behavior, if that is a clue for us to look at, after year 2017, the 19th National Congress, Xi Jinping come up with different things in year 2018 against Taiwan, and then the year 2019 about the new formula regarding how the issue on Taiwan. I personally would not be so sure that Xi Jinping would in a position to afford to take hits. And put another way, when the Xi Jinping just took his third terms, and then Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, just immediately came to Taiwan. What would that look to him? You're rubbing my face, right? And you're using this to congratulate my third terms. So, of course, this is not a dispute against another proposition, but basically some behavior about how to assess Xi Jinping and other possibilities we also need to look at.
Stop there. Thank you. Andrew, I think you had a response to that, or the comments to that.
Yeah, I think Dr. Lai's right in the sense that why are we talking about this today? Well, it's because of Beijing's actions, right? And Beijing's policy, they initiated it's about national unification, whether it's unification by force or so-called peaceful unification. That's clearly initiated by Beijing. But the reality is below that level, Beijing really is in reactive mode, responding, at least in their own minds. And I think the best example, or the best evidence of that is we hear about the status quo. Both Washington and Beijing talk about maintaining the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, and they each accuse the other. They each point fingers at the other, saying you're changing the status quo, right? And so I think that the perception in Beijing is that we are reacting because the U.S. and Taiwan are changing the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Of course, both sides disagree on what that status quo is, and that's part of the problem. But again, from China's perspective, they are reacting to nefarious things in their minds that Washington and Taipei have done or are doing.
We really enjoy these back and forth, and I think that's really what these discussions are really valuable for, and it really kind of teases out the nuances and importance of analytical nuances of our discussion. But I do want to turn and this actually relates, to this broader discussion, but we're turning now, I think, more towards, what do we do about it, right? And I want to turn to you because you have recently, written an excellent piece in called "The Collapse of One China." And I mean, you covered this issue about, the different status quo, and I mean, this is a great segue. There's no coordination whatsoever in that conversation right now, but this is an excellent segue to my question for you. And really, and it builds on this, the piece that you wrote, because in it you call for the need to adopt, when I quote, enhanced measures to deter Beijing. So why do you think these enhanced measures are necessary, and what do you specifically recommend? These measures.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I think they're necessary because of everything that you just heard from Dr. Lai, from Andrew, from it's that clearly there are some differences of views between Washington, Beijing, and Taipei, and I just don't see them changing for a while, right? I mean, absent a regime change in any one of those three capitals, which doesn't appear likely, right? Anytime soon. And given those different sort of definitions and outlooks of what it means to pursue independence, which, China sees everything as pursuing independence, right? Every speech or book or a new textbook or this or that. And so that's violating the status quo. For the United States, I think we're like, it's not independence because they didn't declare independence, right? Like there's no change in the status quo. And so I don't know that those are going to be reconciled anytime soon. And that's why really I think it comes down to raising the costs and increasing the risk of the military action that nobody wants to see happen, because like our Scobell was saying, he may be driven to that where he sees himself losing and having to make the big bet to try to win. And you do that through a couple of ways. One is obviously the military deterrence, and I think a lot of folks believe, as I do, that Taiwan can really complicate that invasion factor through whatever hundreds of sort of ground-based, coastal-based platforms with thousands of missiles like that. To me, as a U.S. Marine, looking at it, if I was going to try to take that island, that'd be a pretty big deterrent. And I think Taiwan's starting down that road, which is great. But there are a couple other things that we could do, and I think the internationalization of the problem is important, and we're seeing some progress on that there are countries other than the United States that are speaking up, right? That are expressing concern about peace and stability across the strait. That in itself, when you see Beijing sort of backlash against stuff, that's a sign that it's working. That is in itself a sign that that's something they now have to put into their calculation. Be like, oh man, now the Germans or the Japanese, we have to increase the chance that they're going to throw something at us if we do something bad, right? Whether it's economic, whether it's military, who knows what that something is, but it's more cost for China to have to incur and consider. And so I think things that do that, the U.S. pushing to internationalize the problem, to make sure the narrative points to, one thing that I think is important to point out is that China is not, as they have agreed, the United States and other countries, to strive. He's not really striving for a peaceful resolution, at least not in our minds. And we should be clear and more open about pointing that out, because I think the world opinion on who's right and who's wrong is another sort of weighing factor on whether they choose to do something. So there's a few things I think that are available that we could do in the immediate and intermediate term.
I think in the interest of time right now, what I want to do is actually go into some of the questions that I wanted to present to all of the panelists. And so I would invite, any of the panelists to comment on these questions, in response to the questions, not directed to anyone in particular. But I want to return to one of the framing questions that I, presented in the very beginning, which is really the looking at the similarities and differences of the past 1995, 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis and the current phase that we are in right now with the more recent exercises and tests. And so, what to you see were the similarities and differences of these two two episodes? Perhaps who would like to take a stab at that first? Arthur, great.
Okay, from what I can think of, there are several differences between what happened 1996 and last month. Yeah, we see the map there. Yeah, in 1996, actually it's a two exercise, not one. In July, one in July, and one in March, January 1996. And also the 1996 did not the so-called enclose Taiwan, encircle Taiwan, basically. But this one we see about the Taiwan encircle. Why that? How to explain that? Maybe we all know that the China military modernization to speed up after 1996 crisis. That means that they don't have good platform. They don't have good so-called command control communication system in the space and in the air, probably. Second is about the missile. The 95, 96, the missile only launched outside of the Taiwan harbor, Kaohsiung and Hilo. And then this one goes into the east of Taiwan. Again, apparently, we know that China, maybe all kind of rumors say, the missile launched in 95, 96 because they used the US GPS system and it was denied, signal denied. So they didn't hit the target area. But this time they have their own Beidou GPS system. So apparently they can, they have their own command control system and the navigation system. Yeah, and that time they kind of maybe surprised in 1996 for them to see the US can send 2 aircraft carriers. So maybe 1996 in there, they don't think US might get involved. But this time, so that's why we can see why the target area in east of Taiwan in the Pacific Ocean area. Apparently it's kind of an A2AD because we all know that since 1996 crisis, China tried to do a so-called 杀手舰, and the DF-21, DF-17 able to maneuver and hard to intercept for the US Patriot system, so forth. So apparently it's A2AD. So, and also send a warning signal to probably Japan because we all know that since 1996 Taiwan crisis, US and Japan to strengthen their so-called alliance agreement, so forth, so-called Taiwan contingency. 周边 surround 周边有事 that in Japan surrounding areas contingency, so forth. So but this time, although they say they have developed the so-called hypersonic and highly vulnerable, maneuverable the missiles, but apparently at least what we heard, the DF-21 and the DF-17 were not launched, and also the latest, the so-called J-20 was not used. We don't know why anyway. Yeah, also as already Russell mentioned in 1996 they have amphibious operation, but this time they don't have amphibious operation. But probably it probably is more dangerous for us because we all know that in China now so-called 13 group army. In each group army, they have a so-called special force brigade, along with the Marine Corps and airborne parachute. So means that they have their so-called amphibious landing has been tremendous updated. The so-called three direction, the landing attack. And also we see the dynamic area is much bigger than the 1996, implies that they have strong more firepower probably to cover the whole area probably. And also in 1996, they didn't cross over the so-called median line, but this time they crossed quite frequent, but we just don't know how frequent it is. Yeah, so that's what I can think of the difference between the one in 95 and the one in last month. So probably let me stop there.
If there are no other comments from the other panelists, Andrew, okay,
Just one that Arthur gave a really an excellent and comprehensive overview. I think another difference is the lead up to both. I think in '95, Beijing was caught off guard, caught by surprise, because they'd been reassured by the Clinton administration that they wouldn't give President Lee Teng-hui a visa, and then of course that's not what happened. So I think that was really a surprise. But this go round in 2022, there was a lot more lead time, and so Beijing had a lot more time to prepare these exercises. Speaker Pelosi was supposed to go originally planning to go in April, and then there was even before well over a month before, will she, won't she, a lot of controversial media speculation about it. So Beijing, in short, had a lot more time to prepare this time around than they did in '95.
so
And I would take, this time I would take more political angle in it. Of course, this operation on Taiwan, not just about military, but also the cyber operation as well economic sanction in it. So this is in the scale that's much more broader, and which means that we have to deal with the comprehensive the Chinese action on Taiwan. But I also like to cautious that this is not the end of these exercises, because we probably are in the beginning of the 1995-96 sort of the exercise, because 95-96 we have 3 round of exercise. One in July, one in November in '95, and then the third one in March '96. There's a possibility that after this one, of course, we still continue to have the Chinese military incursions, and then another probably a bigger one, whether that's in the election, November election, or possibly before the presidential elections. So that's I think we should prepare for ourselves. It could be a continuation of the series of those events. And that is not, and that would change the whole mindset about the preparation itself. Third, the 95-96 political message basically is to intimidate and trying to scare out Taiwanese people not to elect or to reduce the President Lee Teng-hui his legitimacy as a president. But this time, according to the white paper China announced, and just one day after the exercises, there's a very strong message about how to delegitimize the ROC. In that, that's very different from the so-called deter Taiwan independence, because they do know that the President Taiwan is not going to declare Taiwan independence. But nonetheless, to do that, and their white paper spent a huge volume in attacking the ROC, which means that basically emphasizes President Taiwan her formula about ROC Taiwan. So in this sense, the whole action especially the one that draw the missile dropping zone that encroaching our territorial water, which is aiming at to legitimize all the sovereign claim that we have and the sovereign capability that we have. To make the whole world know that the Taiwan territory is Chinese territory. So the political message this time is very different from the 1996, and I think that message needs to also pay much more attention to.
And I just want to ask one more question for our panelists, and I'll turn to the audience Q&A. And just for our online audience, again, if you'd like to submit your questions, you can, you can use the chat function on our YouTube page. You can also send them an email at contact@globaltaiwan.org, or you could also tweet us. And so, final question before turning to you, audience Q&A is, and really just is literally looking in terms of what we might expect, from Beijing, and in terms of what it will do in the near term, militarily and non-militarily, right? So looking at, by my near term, I'm looking at, within the year 2024, right, which is, when Taiwan is scheduled to have its next presidential election, and more midterm, to post 2024 on to 2030. And I think just as reference, I would add here that the DNI, April Haynes, it assessed actually just in a recent Senate hearing that the threat, that her assessment, the IC's assessment, that the threat to Taiwan between now and 2030 is, and I quote, acute, end quote, right? So what is your assessment about the near term and midterm operations that it would conduct militarily, non-militarily? Any takers?
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I don't think this will surprise. I think there's some risk, obviously, in the near term. I think that risk is primarily in these gray zone areas, if you want to call them that. I think they'll be increasing, whether you want to call them center line crossings or just, I think infringements for the contiguous zone and even the territorial airspace and waters, right, of Taiwan. I think you'll just see more and more of that. Again, if you're watching PLA development, that seems natural if you put yourself in their shoes. That will create, obviously some serious decision-making part in what ROE and what sort of criteria Taiwanese military needs to adopt and do so in a smart way, right? That it doesn't create a pretext for Taiwan, for China, because, one of the things, once China is a little more risk tolerant, as, Andrew has mentioned, is that they may be willing to create a situation that could escalate, but they're going to obviously want to put the blame and point the finger at Taiwan for initiating it. And so, sort of not falling into that trap is quite critical. You can call it quote unquote an accident, but I think a lot of these things are like intended accidents, or could be, right? Spun in the wrong way. But in the longer term, as you go toward 2030, I think it'll be, we need to keep an eye on things, I think, in Taipei and in Taiwan in general, like in political trends, which are obviously moving in a certain direction that Beijing does not like. And as you get to, like, obviously there's the 2024 election, but as you get to the 2028 election, at what point does, just frankly, does the KMT either abandon the 92 consensus, or does the KMT become somewhat irrelevant as a party, right? And I think as you get toward 2028, that campaign season in 2027, it's a dangerous part. Beijing's going to be watching that. And maybe that's when they kind of go, well, there's just no point in trying to continue to live for this peaceful fiction, if you will. So those are things that we need to be concerned about, I think, for the end of the decade. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Arthur, please.
Yes, we have to make prediction, but these days, I guess, I read those analysis made by many of many in China. They have seems they have a argument. the literal translation that to make Taiwan feel painful， 是，那就是惩罚台湾，是台湾觉得很痛，means that to punish Taiwan to make Taiwan people feel extremely painful, then Taiwan will be surrounded. So those are the no, this is idea proposed by many analysts, but I don't know the Xi Jinping endorsed or not. I don't know anyway. So so if that is the case, so we can think about economically, militarily, or diplomatically to make Taiwan really painful and so maybe to cut our diplomatic relation or to more economic sanction against certain Taiwan products, so on and so forth. So those are the from reading those statements or conclusion those China analysts made. So maybe this is the way they are going to do down the road. But I guess but from my own observation, I guess 2027 is quite a critical period because there will be another party Congress. Then, so in next 5 years from this year, Xi Jinping will enter his third term. If he didn't achieve any kind of progress on Taiwan issue, then he will be perceived as a failed leader, probably. So on the other hand, if he achieves some kind of progress, then it's very likely for him to stay another fourth term, probably. So that's why I have this kind of idea, because when Hu Jintao conclude his full term, some friend in Beijing I talked privately say, well, if we look back, since Hu Jintao did not achieve anything, he just followed whatever Jiang Zemin has done, and he just do it, and he didn't achieve anything. So this kind of comments by the ordinary people, and I don't know what kind of impact on Xi Jinping, on Hu Jintao. Will Xi Jinping really care about his so-called legacy or his status in so-called CCP history or not? So that's why I'm thinking, maybe 2027 is really a kind of a critical period for for the Taiwan-China relation. So probably let me stop here.
Thank you to all our panelists for your comments and sharing your insights with us here at GTI. They were incredibly helpful. Now I wanted to turn now to our audience, and for anyone who has any questions, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and then state your name as well as your affiliation, and please try to limit yourself to questions and not lengthy comments. All right, okay. This gentleman right here in front, on the front row. And then in the interest of time, I want to take several questions and then ask the panelists to respond to them. So
I'm Peter Humphrey, intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. When I look at a map like that, I can pretty much guess where the invasion point is. This is the deception of Operation Overlord. And that brings up the biggest issue of all, which is this is an incredible gift to the Defense Intelligence Agency, which, by the way, is collecting all the missiles that got launched during an exercise off the seafloor for analysis, including hypersonics. My problem is a certain magical thinking that goes on when we discuss this problem. Number one, we don't have convoy space from Poland going into Ukraine. There's going to be no convoys once that invasion is throwing projectiles into the air. That means that every single piece of equipment that Taiwan needs has to be on the ground now. ready for the invasion, because there will be no deliveries during the invasion. This is magical thinking that pervades the entire community. Second of all, Taiwan has no hope of achieving victory without an unbelievably rigorous civil defense, a Swiss-style civil defense. How many Taiwan citizens know how to pick up a rifle and fire it with some accuracy? How many Taiwan citizens know how to operate a simple radio once all the cell phones are gone? Complete unpreparedness of the Taiwanese population dooms them to failure. So I need some help with those magical thinkings.
So let's get over here.
Well, thank you for the terrific discussion. So my name is Kensuke Abe, Marine Corporation. And I guess my original question was does the time side with China or not? I mean, the buying time side with China. But your discussion seems to me that it is not. And so my question is, so if it is the case, so should Taiwan and the US have any strategy to make to change the Chinese mind? Actually, you are not losing Taiwan. This is my question. Thank you.
Let me take one more question. Here.
Gerhard van Looys, former editor of Taiwan Communique and advisor here at GTI. Thanks very much for the excellent presentations. I want to pick up on the point raised by Ivan, that was internationalization. How much internationalization do we really need, should we have, in order to deter China?
Great. So I think we have three sets of questions, and we're going to go around to. Okay, actually, you know what? I'm going to take more questions. All right. Okay. So, it's David right here, and then the gentleman from back.
David Tsai from GTI. I want to take up the question about the enhanced measure to deter Beijing that fails. What would come next? What would be the magic or the drastic or the dramatic countermeasure to stop the Chinese aggression? And actually, that means the war starts. Okay, is there any magic measure? US side and the Taiwanese side. Now you talk about the civil defense. That's one of the parts that would be in the reserve. But it's the immediate measure to deter, to counter to the Chinese.
Last question now. We'll take our last question, and then we're just going to go for our entire. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Jeffrey Kuo. I'm from George Washington University. So my question is, since you mentioned about the upcoming U.S. election midterm this year, right? I just wondering, can you just switch back to the Taiwanese perspective to see if the upcoming election in Taiwan will realign the Chinese strategies to the Taiwanese strait right now? Say that just this is a big if like KMT will they considerably win the election in the end of this year, and will that ease the tension right now, or if you think that they say that the DPP has a better perform better in the election, will that like increase the tension? And I just wondering what do you think about this? Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have five questions here and very little time. I do want to impress upon our panelists that we'll give a little extra, a few more extra minutes beyond our original end time. But try to keep your your responses also succinct. and I'll allow you to, address whichever questions that you'd like to tackle here. And then just the 5 question quickly is the first one with regards to logistical challenges in civil defense and response on those issues. Second is, if, the imminent threat is, if the threat is more imminent, is there a political means by which to persuade Beijing not to act, right? So, just sort of looking at a political solution to these issues. 3 is internationalization. 4 is if deterrence fails, what do we do then? What is there a magic weapon, so to speak, to counter China at that point? And then finally, looking at the local elections and the impact that could have on China's approach to Taiwan. So, all right, over to the panelists. Want to start? Okay, so Ivan, let's start with you then. We'll go down the.
All right. All right, quickly then, I guess, I think I generally agree with the comments, and the first sort of comment that we had. Like, I think that's obvious. That's something I think the U.S. and Taiwan are both identified and working on. Could we speed it up? Could we do more resources toward those things? Absolutely. Like more munitions, a civil defense capability. I think the China administration recognizes it and is working on it. Again, could we do it faster? Sure. On the next question is, I believe that Beijing thinks that time is still on its side, but it believes that, if you look at Hong Kong, it believed that for a long, long time until it didn't believe it, right? Until 2019, and 2 million people went out on the streets. Then it decided, okay, I'm going to change tactics. And so it could turn that fast. That's my concern. But I think right now, and I would say for the next few years, Beijing believes time's on its side. Can we convince them that they're not losing Taiwan? My personal feeling on this is no, because to do that is to interfere. In my mind, that's the equivalent of interfering in Taiwan's democracy. Like, the Taiwanese people are going to feel what they feel, and they're going to poll the way they poll, and those indications are that Beijing's losing Taiwan, and it's just a fact. I don't think that trend will change. And then the more internationalization, the better. I think you could start, with civil society, with economics. I think, frankly, TSMC investing in other places around the world does not make, the world less dependent on Taiwan. I think it actually makes it more, increases the connections and connectivity between Taiwan and the world, and it makes other countries more vested in Taiwan's continued existence in its current status. And then the question about failing to deter Beijing, it means that I think in this case, our military deterrence measures, which should be sort of the defense by denial capabilities, those sort of things that will survive in an initial attack of lots of missiles coming down at them. Those things can't be fake. They have to be real, right? So they're deterrence measures, but when deterrence fails, they are the thing. They are the measures. That's the answer. Like, you actually need the capability to deny the invasion, period. So it can't be like, I think I maybe have the capability. Like, China may think no, and they may make a decision. They may feel compelled, but I think Taiwan needs the confidence that they can actually deny it.
Great. Thank you, Ivan.
Yeah, thank you. I just address several questions. First of all, yes, I agree with the first question, so that stock is very important, and also add up to the attempt and sensitivity about how to face the issue of blockade. And that's why right now all the operations by China, raising the central line of Taiwan Straits and the military operation in the proximity in Taiwan, and how that might result to the further exercise regarding a similar blockade situation. That is something that is on the Taiwan military planners' mind very much. And also it's up to who will be the one that break the blockade when Taiwan is under attack, will Taiwan or the United States? And if that's Taiwan, then the capability we need to have to break the blockade, would that be in sync with the current asymmetric defense when we are putting everything on preventing them from landing on shore? So those are very serious questions that in discussion in Taiwan. And also regarding the civil defense, I think well, Taiwan is not yet like Israeli, not like yet like Switzerland, but definitely we are much better than Japan, for example. If you look at the people with age, especially young men and age older than 40, every one of them have been in the compulsory military services, extended period of under training. They do know how to fire rifles. So the issue is that how are we able to get them, and especially civilian units, be able to organize themselves in a fashion that will help the defense. But I will say that those civilian units, they are not the regular military. The military itself has its own replacement and the strategy about the warfare. So those reserve will function in a very different way. Whether that's like the Ukraine cases in the territorial defense forces or in the Poland cases of others, that's something that needs to be discerned. And I also say that right now, the Taiwan society, there's a civil society initiative regarding how to improve our own capability should a war happen in Taiwan. So you have the Kuma Academy, they try to do the training, and earlier, before that, there's Inon Wu, he's the magnificent Taiwan, try to raise the awareness. And now we even have a billionaire like Cao Xing, who invest about who donated about $100 million trying to get something. So there are those initiatives, and it has been widely accepted and responded by the society itself. And right now the issue is that how are those the initiative by the society and the government, they are able to integrate together and in a more fashion and in more an orderly manner. Third thing regarding the Chinese, I would say that China, even until like last year, they still not only been convinced that the Chinese on their side, but time is on their side in terms of they're going to overtake the United States. So we're talking a very different scale of the Chinese confidence. And probably this year, what something happened will derail or will make them believe that the time for them to be over the United States will be a little bit later. But nonetheless, they still firmly believe, especially Xi Jinping, firmly believe that China will overtake the United States. And so the issue about China-Taiwan, right now, we need to look at it with that kind of confidence. Does that the Xi Jinping can wait, or Xi Jinping choose to accelerate? It seems that Xi Jinping is in mode of trying to accelerate because he wants to achieve something. So this is a very different breed of leadership that we're facing. And so that's some of the suggestion like the Taiwan need to let Chinese believe that unification is still hopeful. But then look at the year 2019, 18, the election. And that will answer the question on the back. When the KMT win the landslide in the year 2018 local election, but look what happened in 2019, January 2nd. Xi Jinping pushed forward rather than relax. So actually the tension rises rather than reduced. So I think that put up all the our calculations. We hope that we can put we have a letter for the Xi Jinping to step down, but Xi Jinping just kick it out. That he does not need the letter, he will just want to surrender. So I think we're facing a very stark situation. And year 2027, the scenario that is very seriously been looked at by the government.
Yeah.
Answer two questions. First, on how can we change Beijing's calculus, influence them to persuade them that things aren't going against them, especially in the Taiwan Strait. I think it's really hard to do that because we're in U.S.-China relations in a really bad place, and they're not likely to improve anytime soon, which means there's a climate of mutual suspicion and distrust, and it's hard to get to reassurance. I think the best we can hope for is deterrence and dissuasion, and that gets to the second question I want to address is, if you get into a war, what's the magic weapon? I don't think there is. I don't think there is a magic weapon. So, and getting to this risk risk tolerance, Beijing's calculus in pre-conflict and versus in the midst of a conflict. I think the calculus is likely going to change. So once Beijing is committed to military operation on Taiwan, I suspect, especially if it's Xi Jinping in charge, who's the commander in chief, the risk tolerance will increase because they've committed forces. Backing down is either not an option or certainly not the least preferred option. So doubling down to try and achieve victory, whatever that means. And so that's what it underscores to me that what's really important is, everybody loses in a war. Taiwan Strait. So how do we avoid that war? And it's going to be, it's not, there's no such thing as an inevitable war. I think it is an avoidable war, but I think for the reasons we've been discussing, it's increasingly challenging to try and avoid that war both in the near term and the medium term. The near term because I think that there's less likely to be a decision made in Beijing that to use force, but because of the heightening increased provocations and tensions in the strait, there's the danger of unintended escalation. But in the medium term, the worry, my concern is that there could be a deliberate decision in Beijing that time is coming to use more.
The last one.
I guess the people in my age in Taiwan, we all have experienced so-called civil defense. I remember maybe late 1980s when I returned to Taiwan, I was invited to give a talk at a factory. I asked, I was wondering why you invite me to give a talk at the factory, because the person answered that this is part of the civil defense program. In the old days, the Cold War era, the confrontation between Taiwan and China, Chiang Kai-shek want to return to China, and then the Chairman Mao want to take Taiwan by force. So inevitably there will be a kind of war military. So each factory has its own so-called civil defense, into the firefighting, the health, medical, emergent medical help, so on and so forth. So actually, no, this is, we did have this kind of experience previously, but since 1979, we really enjoyed so-called peace dividend, and we've already forgot what we have done previously. So yeah, I guess it will, yeah. I-Chung mentioned about what I call the weekend warrior these days in Taiwan. After the Ukraine invasion, we have more and more this kind of autonomous the groups, what I call the weekend warriors. But it was, how do we integrate those? So we need a government plan, frankly speaking. But the upward situation is whoever government doing this plan and make a program, then the whole society will get nervous. So this is some kind of a dilemma here. Xi Jinping has been extremely confident about Dongsheng Xijiang, rise of East and the decline of West. But a couple of days ago, I read a short analysis made by Mr. Fu Mengzi. He was the deputy director of the Kicker. We all know the Kicker is part of the Ministry of State Security. He said, there's one sentence attract me a lot. And he said, the momentum for the rise of West and the decline of East has slowed down.
It's decline of West.
In Chinese, 东升西降趋缓. I don't know how precise my translation, at the moment. But, when I read this phrase, I'm a little bit, think what it means. That China now realize, we all know China economic development has made a tremendous difficulty these days. Then if that is the case, will time is in China's side or not, this create another problem now. So I don't have a definite answer, but I guess I fully agree, I-Chung, we really need to prepare ourselves, for the worst situation. Also, from my limited contact with friends in Beijing, Shanghai, seems they don't care about Taiwan's election anymore, frankly speaking, whether it's a Kuomintang win or DPP win, because they know. I guess we all know Eric Zhu visited the one in DC, made a statement. There's no consensus for the 92 consensus. Disappoint Beijing. So, but at least from my limited contact previously, with friendly in Beijing, seems they don't have the illusion, so-called illusion anymore for the KMT or DPP. It does not matter at all which party win the election. Then they will continue to do the united front. So this is my observation.
Well, with that, I know we are well over our original time limit, but the conversation was so rich, and we can really continue to carry this on far more deeper and onwards if we had the time. But we are past time here, and want to thank you all thank our panelists for their excellent comments and observation, and for all of you for attending today's event. If you're not already subscribed to receive our updates, be sure to do so at Global Time.